For those of you who I have not had the opportunity to meet, I'm Alan Kretzer. I'm president of the Youngstown Area Jewish Federation. I welcome all of you to the Jewish Community Center tonight for a very informative and important program. It's wonderful to see this crowd. We appreciate your interest in this commemorative event. The promulgation of the Roman Catholic Church's Nostra Aetate 50 years ago on October 28, 1965, is one of the most important moments in modern Jewish-Christian relations. Abe Foxman, the recently retired leader of the Anti-Defamation League, a giant in the Jewish and interfaith world and a child of the Holocaust, who owes his life to Catholic community leaders who protected him from the Nazis, has called Nostra Aetate a remarkable document that is emblematic of the changes in the Jewish-Catholic relations that have taken place since the end of the Shoah. It is therefore most appropriate that we take note of this anniversary. Those words from Abe Foxman sum up why we're here today, namely to continue to reinforce the special relationship with the Catholic community locally, nationally, and internationally. While the primary speakers today will be members of the clergy, this program is truly intended to be a conversation in which you will all be encouraged to take part. We want to specifically note the recent comments by Pope Francis a few weeks ago on October 28th during a gathering with the international Jewish leaders in honor of the anniversary of the document. The Holy Father specifically drew an analogy to the spirit of Nostra Aetate's rejection of anti-Semitism. He condemned what he described as a modern form of anti-Semitism, namely the denial of Israel's right to exist. He said to attack Jews is anti-Semitism, but an outright attack on the state of Israel is also anti-Semitism. He continued by noting that while there may be political disagreements between governments and on political issues, the state of Israel has every right to exist in safety and prosperity. These heartwarming words speak volumes about the strength of Jewish-Catholic relations for the next 50 years and beyond. For the first portion of the program, I will call on the Most Reverend George Murray, Bishop of the Diocese of Youngstown, for comments. We are so honored and proud that he is here to participate in the program this evening. In fact, Bishop Murray was in Rome for the anniversary, during the anniversary, and I assume he may have some things to share with us about that experience. I welcome and introduce to you Bishop Murray.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I am delighted to be here with you this evening to talk about Nostra Aetate because it is such an important document in the history of the Catholic Church and the history of our relations with the Jewish community. This year, as Alan just mentioned, marks the 50th anniversary of the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council, and also the promulgation of Nostra Aetate, which in Latin means in our time. It is a declaration on the relation of the Church with non-Christian religions. Nostra Aetate was one of the most groundbreaking documents of the Second Vatican Council. It was also one of the most difficult documents to draft and to pass for theological and political reasons, both internal and external to the Church. It remains one of the most consequential documents in the history of the post-Vatican II Church and for relations between Jews and Christians. Nostra Aetate was drafted at the intersection of a new historical consciousness in the Church. the deepening of the meaning of the Jewishness of Jesus, a new awareness of singular humanity on the global front, a heightened consciousness of the responsibility of Christians for anti-Semitism, and the emergence of Holocaust studies, an area of research that is particularly marked by what is called the age of witness, and by the need to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive. We owe a great debt of gratitude to three men who at the beginning of the 1960s were in their 80s, and who at the same time were open to the future and open to the Second Vatican Council. Pope John XXIII and Cardinal Augustin Bea were both 81 in 1962, and the French Jewish historian Jules Isaac was 85. The audience between Jules Isaac and John XXIII on the 13th of June 1960 remains one of the most consequential moments in church history and in the history of Catholic theology. The agenda of the council changed on that day, and with it, Jewish-Christian relations. Now, let's take a moment to look at the context in which Nostra Aetate was prepared and presented as a document of the Second Vatican Council. The most important documents of the Second Vatican Council are four constitutions, one on divine revelation, the other on the church, the third on the liturgy, and the fourth on the church in the modern world. There is then a series of decrees on specific aspects of the internal life of the church. There are also three declarations, the first on Christian education, and two others on religious liberty. And one of those is Nostra Aetate. For Nostra Aetate, it was designed to come to terms with a history of problems, misunderstandings, tensions, and even some violence that had occurred between Catholics and Jews. And it intended to make it clear that there was a deep, long-standing, and vibrant relationship that should exist between Catholics and Jews. In the first place, there was a call in the document for collaboration. And I'm going to just quote from the document itself, because it's not a very long document. But in the beginning of the fourth paragraph, we find these words: "Sounding the depths of the mystery which is the church, this sacred council remembers the spiritual ties which link the people of the new covenant to the stock of Abraham. The Church of Christ acknowledges that all Christ's faithful who are people of faith are daughters and sons of Abraham. On this account, the Church cannot forget that it received the revelation of the Old Testament by way of that people with whom God, in his inexpressible mercy, established an ancient covenant. Nor can it forget that it draws nourishment from the good olive tree onto which the wild olive branches of the Gentiles have been grafted." I've always liked that phrase and that image of the good olive tree and the wild olive branches of the Gentiles and grafting the two together. But the point that they were making there is that Christians and the history of Christianity is not in a vacuum. That we come from the Jewish tradition and we are rooted in the Jewish scriptures. Secondly, there was a very clear and unambiguous description of how that spiritual heritage continues into our present existence. Since Christians and Jews have such a common spiritual heritage, this sacred council wishes to encourage further mutual understanding and appreciation. This can be achieved especially by way of biblical and theological inquiry and through friendly discussions. So the council wanted to deepen the relationship and found those ways of scholarship and also friendly discussion as being helpful roads to that. The third area, and it was probably the area that caused the most attention when the document was released, was an unambiguous rejection of the deicide idea, which had been so common, especially with National Socialism. In the document it says this: even though the Jewish authorities and those who followed their lead pressed for the death of Christ, neither all Jews indiscriminately at the time, nor Jews today, can be charged with the crimes committed during his passion. And lastly, in the document, there is a call for even more collaboration. Indeed, the church removes and should remove every form of persecution. So along with that collaboration, the document is saying because we stand together, because we have a common heritage, we must stand against any form of discrimination or anti-Semitism. Indeed, the church reproves every form of persecution against whoever it may be directed, remembering then its common heritage with the Jews, and moved not by any political consideration, but solely by the religious motivation of Christian charity. It deplores all hatreds, persecution, displays of anti-Semitism, and any other form of inappropriate behavior directed against the Jews at any time and from any source. Now, for us today, that's pretty common. We would expect that. But at the time, in the 1960s, that was not the case. And when you think about it, it was basically 20 years after the end of Nazism. And there was, and as we all know, there continues to be anti-Semitism in our world. But the church was making the clear point that Jewish people could not be blamed for the death of Christ, and that there was no excuse for continued anti-Semitism. Nostra Aetate is more the fruit of more the fruit of Pope John the 23rd, I'm going to come to John Paul II, and a few leaders such as Augustin Bea and Bishop Jaeger of Padenburg, than the product of a large theological movement. There was a movement at the time of the Second Vatican Council for liturgical reform, and that was a movement that was across the world. This was mainly the inspiration of Cardinal Bea and of Pope John the 23rd, who then spent time convincing others of how important it was that the council make a statement concerning the relationship of the Catholic Church to the Jews. The declaration announces a fundamental shift much more than it receives or exemplifies a theological current. It is, in other words, a document that opens the door to uncharted territory. It announced the new relationship between Jews and Christians and said that it had to be lived in a way that was rooted in theology. In this sense, the history of the reception of Nostra Aetate is integral and important. Now, what happened after Nostra Aetate was promulgated? Well, the history of the reception of the document is complex and must be considered at different levels. What is important to outline here is the reception by the popes after the Second Vatican Council. The Pope who became the most vocal advocate of Nostra Aetate and relationships with the Jews was Pope John Paul II. And that was a result of the peculiar convergence between his lived experience with Jews in Poland, his interpretation of World War II as an essential part of the modern theological understanding of the world, and an awareness of the new task of the global papacy in a world no longer under colonial design, especially in the Middle East. Under John Paul II's papacy in 1985, the Vatican published notes on the correct way to present the Jews and Judaism in preaching and catechesis in the Roman Catholic Church. In 1990, there were several statements from European and American bishops about the history of anti-Semitism. In 1993, the Pontifical Biblical Commission published the interpretation of the Bible in the Church, and did so in conjunction with Jewish biblical scholars. And between 1993 and 1994, there was the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the State of Israel. In 1997, the Vatican organized a conference on Christianity and anti-Judaism. And in 1998, the document of the Commission on the Religious International Theological Commission published its collection of memoirs called Memory and Recollection, The Church and the Faults of the Past. And then quite dramatically, there was the various gestures on the part of John Paul II. His historic visit to the Synagogue of Rome, the first for a pope, on the 13th of April, 1986. The interreligious prayer for peace at Assisi in 1986. Then his visit to Israel between March 21st and 26th in 2000. And then, in a liturgy on March the 12th of 2000, there was that very moving moment when, at the request of Pope John Paul II, one of the cardinals in St. Peter's solemnly recited a confession of sins against the people of Israel. As John Paul II's health declined, he was no longer able to continue the pace that he had set. But at the same time, Nostra Aetate was well established in the Catholic culture, and subsequent popes have carried that on. What then is the future for Nostra Aetate and for Catholic-Jewish relations? Well, clearly, in looking at various programs across the country, there's much more interest in further exploration of the Jewish roots of Christianity, trying to get a better sense of the connectedness and how Christianity grew out of the Jewish experience, and at the same time building respect for both sides of the question. Secondly, Jewish and Christian scholars are working closely on biblical scholarship and a better understanding of the scriptures themselves. Jewish scholars oftentimes have a better sense of the words and the nuances of the various words that are found in the scriptures, which has been very helpful for Christian biblical scholars. And lastly, I think Nostra Aetate calls us to active opposition as Christians to anti-Semitism, not only in the Middle East, which Pope Francis mentioned specifically, but also in Western Europe and parts of the United States. There's a disturbing trend in Western Europe that you see in a number of countries where right-wing political parties are running for office and sometimes winning, and part of their platform is either a blatant or a veiled form of anti-Semitism. As Christians, it is important, and especially as Catholics through this document, that we stand firm and stand clearly against any form of anti-Semitism, and that we defend the right of all people to exist. Following John the 23rd's decision in June of 1960, and after meeting with Jules Isaac, when the decision was made to develop a document that would speak directly to the relationship of the Catholic Church to the Jewish community, Rabbi Abraham Herschel was asked by the American Jewish Committee to help draft a memorandum that would change the tone of the discussion concerning Catholic-Jewish relations. And he wrote this: "Both Judaism and Christianity share the prophet's belief that God chooses agents through whom his will is made known and his work done throughout history. Both Judaism and Christianity live in the certainty that mankind is in need of ultimate redemption, that God is involved in human history, and that in relations between men and women, God is at stake." I think that that is what we share at the very root of our relationship, that God is important, that God is at stake. We must continue with determination and courage to grow in knowledge and respect of each other. We must be honest about the mistakes that have been made in the past and the mistakes that have led to the death of many people. But the fact remains that we believe in Yahweh, and together we must strive to walk toward him so that he may bring us home forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Murray, for those informative, instructive, and inspiring words. Now we are on to the conversation portion of the program. Joining Bishop Murray are two of the three rabbis who reside here in the Mahoning Valley. Rabbi Joseph Schoenberger from Temple El Emeth in Liberty, and Rabbi Saul Oreski from Ohev Tzedek in Boardman are going to be joining us. Rabbi Franklin Muller from Congregation Road of Shalom in Youngstown would have been here this evening. However, he has been out of town attending the Reform Movement's biennial national conference in Florida. Also replacing me here at the podium, Bonnie Birdman, Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council for the Youngstown Area Jewish Federation, will take over this aspect of the conversation and get it started. Again, thank you all for being with us tonight. And I am really pleased to see the size of this crowd, the enthusiasm, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the balance of the program. Thank you.
Well, as the gentlemen are getting seated and settled upstairs and up on the stage, and Sarah makes sure all the microphones are working out, just say a few words. My part of this evening is actually easy. I get to sit back and listen to what I know is going to be brilliant scholarly conversation. about what we just heard. And Bishop, thank you so much again for your comments. They were inspiring and incredibly moving, and I truly appreciate them. And I appreciate having you here this evening. And again, I appreciate all of you coming on what I know is a busy day and a busy time of year, and it's great to have such a large crowd. So a couple things. First, actually, one is housekeeping. There's food and coffee in the back, so feel free to help yourself at any time, either during and, of course, after, when we can all enjoy some fellowship together. The other couple, well, we're going to talk for about maybe 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes. The three members of the clergy will talk amongst themselves. If there's a lull in the conversation, I'll jump in, but I sincerely doubt that will happen. You know, I'm sure there's got to be a joke about two rabbis and a bishop.
Yeah.
We're missing the bar.
Oh, okay. So we'll leave it at that. But I just want to say just a couple of things to maybe frame the conversation. We'll ask the rabbis to speak first, just to reflect on what the bishop said. But one thing that struck me was at the very end when the bishop talked about the future. He talked about the interest in Jewish roots in Christianity. Jewish and Christian scholars are working together on biblical scholarship, and how there's really a call for Christians to actively oppose anti-Semitism. And he talked about this need to do it worldwide, but the beautiful thing is that it's happening right here in Youngstown. It's been happening for a long time in Jewish-Christian dialogue. Many of us know very well Father George Velasco. Oftentimes we refer to him as Rabbi Velasco, and it's not on purpose, it's just how we see him. And for many years, Rabbi Schellenberger has been working with him very closely on our local Jewish-Christian dialogue, and since he came to town, Rabbi Oresti has joined that effort. And a few weeks ago, I had a wonderful program at LMIT, the second anniversary program on issues of Nostra Aetate, or the second program, may not be an annual one, but the lecture series, the Rabbi Meyer lecture series that it was a part of, is an annual lecture series. So this stuff is happening, and it's good and it's important. And for those of us who don't know all the intricacies of the document or intricacies of the different faiths, it's really important to hear from the leaders and to talk to each other about it, because it's that understanding and the development of mutual respect and the realization that we all do come from the same place. So there were a couple things that struck me, and then two other quick things that struck me, and then I'll kick it over to the rabbis and to the bishop. Pope Francis, who in many circles in the international Jewish community is a rock star. We really like this Pope, and we're so thrilled, and we're so heartwarmed by his comments a few weeks ago on the anniversary of the document. But I thought it was very interesting that this is the first Pope to have been born, or to serve after the Nostra Aetate was promulgated. Well, no, he wasn't born after that. No, never mind. I'll take that back. I just thought about that a few moments ago, and I got my years wrong. So we'll leave that as is. But the last thing I wanted to say was, a lot of people often ask, was there a Jewish document that matched Nostra Aetate? And there actually was. Not quite the same, because hierarchically Judaism is structured differently than the Catholic Church. We don't have a central authority. So when a leader, clergy or lay in the Jewish community speaks on something, they're usually speaking for him or herself, joining with others, or for the organization they represent. But in September of 2000, there was an essay published called Dabru Emet, a Jewish statement on Christians and Christianity. And it was an essay. It was published in a few major newspapers. It was signed by about 200 rabbis and community leaders around the country. And it had 8 basic points that really reiterated the notions of what were promulgated in Nostra Aetate. Jews and Christians, we worship the same God. We seek authority from the same book. Christians can respect the claim of Jewish people upon the land of Israel. Jews and Christians accept the moral principles of Torah. Nazism was not a Christian phenomenon. The humanly irreconcilable differences between Jews and Christians will not be settled until God redeems the entire world as promised in Scripture. A new relationship between Jews and Christians will not weaken Jewish practice. And finally, Jews and Christians must work together for justice and peace. So I thought that was a really fascinating thing to think about as we celebrate this 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate and the 15th anniversary of the statements made in Dobro Emet. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed panel, and I'm going to sit down. I will only get up if necessary, and I know I'm going to be making myself comfortable for the remainder of the evening. Thank you.
All right, if I can begin, I want to give a plug for some of our Youngstown extended family, because those who know our Jewish families know that we have a lot of extended family for the Fish family in Youngstown, and there was a very significant, important, behind-the-scenes communal worker, Rabbi Wolf Kelman, who was instrumental in helping make the connection so that the person working with Cardinal Bea was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. So, to some extent, our Youngstown Jewish families can have some nachas from Nostra Aetate also in having that connection. And Rabbi Kelman was one of my teachers, so I got to hear some things in the background. We're very fortunate to be able to move forward this way in relationships between Jews and Catholics, because we know we've come so far that it would have been unimaginable in the past for this to happen. My parents, when they lived in Hungary, they survived, liberated at Mauthausen. When they lived in Hungary, they told me that I met with a Catholic priest once with an Italian friend of mine at his church, and they were astounded because their memories of going near a Catholic church meant getting beaten up or worse. That's no longer the case for us. Unfortunately, in many places in the world, it may be coming back. But fortunately, the leadership of the Catholic Church, from top down, has done so much to correct these problems and to find a way to have our communities live in peace. I want to read something from Rabbi Heschel. He wrote, as the bishop said, Nostra Aetate and the preparations for it followed a lot of sensitivities that were post-Holocaust. In many ways, perhaps, the extremes of evil that were perpetrated in the Shoah reminded Christians how that Christianity could have been could have had a role in making people think that that sort of thing was okay. And so the Vatican and others came forward to say that it was not so. And Abraham Heschel wrote, Nazism has suffered a defeat, but the process of eliminating the Bible from the consciousness of the Western world goes on. It is on the issue of saving the radiance of the Hebrew Bible in the minds of men that Jews and Christians are called upon to work together. None of us can do it alone. We both have our covenant, a Christian covenant and a Hebrew covenant that guides us in life. And the work that began with people before Cardinal Bea and Abraham Joshua Heschel, but empowered by the leaders of the Catholic world, has done so much to bring us together. But we still have problems, and about that I want to ask the bishop, because we still have theological issues in terms of how do we reconcile having both of these covenants. For Christians, not just Catholic but other, there has been an issue of how do Christians now reconcile the fact that Jews have our own covenant and that we can coexist, both covenants in one world, God having a relationship with both, because it's very different than the pre-Nostra Aetate theology. And I wonder what happens today, because I still read sometimes and experience sometimes of Christians who still struggle with this new kind of awareness and how to deal with it. And then the second question I'd like to ask, because you know so much more about Nostra Aetate, just something from a Jewish perspective that strikes me, especially in the quote that you were reading. from here. The Jewish authorities and those who followed their lead pressed for the death of Christ. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all the Jews without distinction, then alive, nor against the Jews of today. And the question I have with that, which is I guess my second question, is that somehow that seems to, it's somehow troubling to me that we're still saying not all the Jews responsible because it leaves room for some. And what I learned about the Jewish leadership in Jesus' time is that the hierarchy of the Jewish community were essentially puppets of the Romans. They were not legitimate representatives of the Jewish community. And so this passage in Nostra Aetate, I wonder how it fits with that historical perspective.
Well, two things I'd like to say at the beginning. First of all, you were commenting on Cardinal Bea, and I think it's important to point out that Cardinal Bea was a Jesuit. Secondly, if I could go to your second question first, one of the things that I think we have learned very clearly from our Jewish brothers and sisters is the unfolding of time. In the Old Testament, there's a great deal about the time of God and how that unfolds not overnight, but over a period of time. I think that as we have learned more about the history, the culture, the politics of that period of Jesus' death, we have learned what you have mentioned about how the leaders of the people at the time were very much the puppets of the Romans. Now, usually what happens is we don't go back and change Vatican documents, but they do evolve. There's a development of understanding. And that's why I think it's so important that Jewish scholars and Catholic scholars work together to get the clearest possible understanding of what was occurring at that time. So in the 60s when that was written, that was the common historical understanding. I think that that has evolved and it is reflected in some of the new relationships that exist.
My whole reaction to Nostra Aetate when I reread it recently was that there was so much said and there was so much left unsaid, I think. And it seems to me that there was a process of wanting to correct the worst actions of the past of the church and the worst policies of the past of the church without addressing the overall mood of domination of Jewish people, which had been the prevalent stance of the church from the time that it became dominant. And you know, I think you spoke in your comments about unpleasantries or tension between the Jews and Catholics. I didn't really see it as that. I saw it more as a domination and as an oppression. There's very, very, very few instances that I can ever think of where Jews were dominant and oppressed and persecuted Catholics. There was, to me, always very much a one-sidedness to the situation, unfortunately, and that I didn't see so much addressed. And I'm wondering if in the development of the last 50 years, there has been more of an evening out of attitude on that.
I would point out that Bonnie said this was a dialogue, not a question and answer.
So you're sitting in the middle.
I'm right. I'll switch places with you. One of the things which I think we are, as as a society, as a worldwide society, becoming more and more aware of is that we tend to, when I say we, I mean Westerners, I mean people in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, we tend to see things from a Western perspective. And we oftentimes don't take into consideration people from the East and how they see things. You know, years ago when I taught American history at Georgetown, I taught a course on Native Americans. And in the introduction to the book that I used, the author said, the history of the West is usually told from the East looking West. I am going to tell the history of the West from the West looking East. Well, it was very enlightening for me and for the students to talk about the movement west from the standpoint of Native Americans who saw themselves losing their land, their heritage, their dignity, their families. I think the same thing happens when we talk about Catholic-Jewish relations. That dominance was a political dominance as Christianity became the central religion in most of the West. And I think that it's only recently that we've come to realize that that was in fact a dominance, that it held down Jewish people, Jewish ideas, Jewish culture, Jewish history, and led to some of the worst examples of anti-Semitism. So I think that just as we came to realize over a period of time, and we all wish that the time were shorter than human beings generally take, but it took time for us to come to, as a civilization, to realize the horrors of slavery. But we did. And I think that there is a dialogue and an openness now that did not exist years ago, which is helping all of us to understand that the West is not dominant. It's not just one way or the other, that we do live in a genuinely pluralistic society, and we need to learn to understand and respect each other. And then I just want to make a comment about your beginning point about what was said and what was left unsaid. Anytime you have a document like that, and I'm sure in your own synagogue and working with people, in order to get a document passed, you have to make some adjustments. And there were people at the Second Vatican Council who were in favor of this. The majority were. There were others who were opposed, and so there had to be some things that were left unsaid. But I think that's an opportunity for us to deepen our understanding of the document now. It wasn't said then, it can be said now. And I'm not answering any more questions. You guys talk. You're welcome.
I have to say, not being a Catholic, it's wonderful to be able to have explanations about Catholic theology and what's behind these things. Because we didn't study Catholic theology when we were in the seminary. Why? Even though I studied with Rabbi Heschel's students.
Oh, okay.
Because he taught at my seminary. And when I was in Bangor, Maine, I taught biblical Hebrew, replacing a theologian who was a student of Heschel as well. So it's figured into my life and my education quite a bit. I was fortunate a few weeks ago to be able to go to Seton Hill University, where they have a Catholic university, where there is a Catholic School of Holocaust Study, which is world-renowned, and Father Patrick Desbois was the guest lecturer. It was a 3-day conference, but I went to hear Father Desbois, who many of you may have seen on 60 Minutes. And he was just very powerful and insightful about not only Judaism and Catholicism, but about all the things we're talking about, and specifically working with issues of genocide, the real problems that exist, not only for Jews and Christians in the world, as we see genocide going on today, but also he's expanded his work to study genocide against other groups as well. And with the imprimatur of the Vatican, he does that 24/7 with a 25-person staff in Paris and people all over the world. It's just an amazing thing. But more relevant to what we're talking about today, I got to meet Father John Palikowski and Sister Gemma, who's a co-founder of that program. And they impressed upon me the fact that their generation, and we have Father Belasco here as another example, their generation really took hold of what was asked for by Nostra Aetate in Vatican II, and sought to do everything they could to deepen understanding, to evolve understanding, to work in fellowship, to work in scholarship, to work with communities throughout the world, and not only deepen relationships with Jews, but really to deepen understanding amongst Catholics and others. And it was wonderful to meet the people because they're so dedicated and so knowledgeable. In fact, I think many of them have learned more about Judaism than many Jewish people, including many Jewish professionals. So it's amazing to see how far our worlds have come, the Catholic and Jewish worlds, because of dedicated people like that. And so if I can impose upon you again.
You kind of knew another question was going to
I'm going to sit down.
Like I said, I don't know a lot about Catholic theology, but Father Palikowski commented that from his understanding that Nostra Aetate begins where Romans 9 left off, namely with the understanding that God didn't abandon the Jewish people. God is still with the Jewish people in spite of whatever happened in history, because our covenant is unconditional, and so we're loyal to each other. And I don't know, and it's very important for us in terms of how we get along, and I still don't know exactly how to explain to Jews and Christians how that works theologically for Christians. So I wonder if you can help me.
Well, I think that what we see in theological history are a series of covenants that God makes with his people. And some of those covenants were broken over time, and some of them were held on to. And from our perspective, we see the Jewish covenant as being the original covenant, and then again, from our own perspective, with the coming of Christ, seeing Christ as the Messiah, we see him initiating a new covenant. And that phrase "new covenant" is very important in Catholic theology. But the new covenant is an evolution, an outgrowth of the old covenant. So I don't see them as being separated. I see them as one flowing into the other.
Coexisting.
Coexisting.
Oh, that's what my follow-up was. Is it coexisting? Are there two parallel covenants now? Or does one supersede the other?
Well, I wouldn't think in terms of parallel, like parallel universes or something like that. I would think in terms of there is a richness in the Jewish covenant of the Old Testament, and although you wouldn't see Jesus Christ the way I would, from my perspective, Jesus fulfills the promises of the original covenant. And that's why I think it's important for us to be respectful of the original covenant, because it is in fact original. We didn't start this, you did. And we're grateful to you for starting it.
Right, but we've never superseded it either with another covenant.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is why we, as Jews, generally don't use the term Old Testament, because it's still our testament.
Yes.
And that's, I think, perhaps one of the blocks to completely having equal dialogue with the not only the Catholic and Jewish community, but the Christian and Jewish community, is because there is still a strong belief among a lot of Christianity that there is supersession. That our covenant, the Jewish people's covenant, has been superseded by Jesus and the covenant made with Christianity, and that's a large theological block. Can we really see each other as equal?
I don't think that because we may disagree on that it is a stumbling block. There's a difference of opinion there, I think. And the theologian Karl Rahner talked about the fulfillment of the first covenant. He didn't talk about superseding it. He talked about how that was brought to its fullest understanding in Christ. That's simply not your experience or your theology. But I think we don't have to talk or think in terms of one being higher than the other or better than the other. It's that our experience is that our knowledge and experience of the covenant itself is so connected, intricately connected with Jesus Christ, that it's by nature going to be different from yours. And I think that's okay. I don't see that as a problem, as long as we maintain respect for each other and know that we come from your experience, that we share that initial experience, and then there has been some growth beyond that.
I think I'm going to jump in for a minute. You know, it's interesting, hearing this conversation. Is the mic on?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It was just lowered a little bit. Hearing this conversation, you know, at many of my national conferences, we do discuss the issues of supersessionism, and they're very robust debates, and so I appreciate this conversation, and I think there's an opportunity to continue. But you know what I do, I'm not a member of the clergy. I work in the community, and we look for ways to form consensus and to join together and to recognize and our differences, respect them, and work together within our differences. I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago to speak to a pretty large audience. I talked about the notion of the other in many religions. And in many of our perspectives, you know, we are who we are and everybody else is the other. And Bishop, I don't know, you and I are probably the same and everybody else is the other because we come from the East Coast. You know, I'm from New York, you're all from someplace else. He's from New Jersey, it's close.
I'm from Maryland.
Okay, well that's okay.
I'm in Eastern Maryland.
Southern.
The
Not East
concept
Coast,
of
forget
who
it.
we all are. And we laugh about that, but the concept of who we all are, we all are comfortable in our own skins and we know who we are, and everyone else is somebody else, everyone else is different. So within that context, and within the context of the document, within the context of how we're studying it today, and how we're looking forward to the next 50 years and beyond, as Alan referred to in his opening remarks, where do you all see us, the opportunities for us to be working together here in Youngstown? What can we be doing together? Given our, this new post-Nostra Aetate reality, 50 years later and now beyond, what can we be doing together for this community as hopefully our valley is experiencing a resurgence? Where can we go together? And I'd be interested in hearing from each of you real briefly on that, and then maybe finally opening it up to everyone for questions.
Okay, that's a tall order. I know we all have wish lists that we'd like to accomplish. One of my things now is I'd like to find connections with Jews who are experiencing danger in Europe because Jewish communities require professional guards now because there's so much violence in Europe to be safe. And I'm thinking it would be nice to bring some of them that need a safe place to live to Youngstown to strengthen our community. That would be a very nice thing to do for our community and for people who need a safe place to live. And we want to continue Jewish Christian studies that have been going on for 40 years at least with Father George and expand that to benefit everyone. As we, for the last several years, expanded it to include all faiths. We find subjects and include all the faith groups in the community to study together, to find fellowship together, to build relationships. And so what started with Vatican II, Nostra Aetate, through Father Velasco and his generation, has expanded to working with all the faith communities to try and improve our community for everyone. And now we have new generations with the bishop, with Father Desbois and others who are really working to bring that to the world now, bring everything that they've accomplished and continue that. And we need more guidance as to what we can do to maximize our work for the benefit of everyone.
One of the great but often untold stories of the civil rights movement in the United States is how many Jewish leaders stood with African American leaders and called for social justice.
Including Rabbi Heschel.
Exactly, yes he did. And I think that, Bonnie, when you talk about what can we do here in Youngstown, I think we can work together to care for the poor and to advance the rights of all people across the board, and especially those who are often pushed off, as Pope Francis said, to the margins. And in every community, we have people like that who are not in the mainstream. And I think there's a great deal that we can do together in advancing social justice in our community of Youngstown.
I think what I would like to see is more of the same that we've had of dialogue and projects together, but also to ramp it up somehow so that more of the overall Jewish community and more of the churches of the non-Jewish community are involved in major programs of social justice. I've only been in the community a year and a half now, and what I see from still looking in kind of from the outside is a program here, a program there, little bits and pieces of things happening. I haven't seen any major push towards addressing some really large social program. I think we're doing the dialogue thing in terms of Bible and theology pretty well. I think Father Velasco has done a phenomenal job on that. I'm hoping somebody will, after 120, when he is no longer able, I hope that there will be other people who will pick up the ball and run with that to make sure that it's a permanent dialogue. But to have it addressed in some overall larger way would, I think, be the thing that would carry us on for the next 50 years.
We're in a time when our veterans, World War II veterans, our liberators, the Holocaust survivors, not many are left, and those who are left are very elderly. They're not all able to participate and have the influence that they had for decades. And my perception as a child of survivors is that the world is really suffering. To me, the diminution of traditional values in society that we always had, a true respect for pluralism that was something we prized in America and in many places, is in danger, because to me, those people from that generation championed those values. What they saw in Europe, what they saw in the concentration camps, I think changed them and had a profound impact upon them. And without the palpable presence of those people and their influence, not just making public presentations, but as a patriarch or a matriarch of a family, as a person in a neighborhood with relationships. Without those people, I think it makes it even more important for responsible people in the community to do what we can to re-emphasize those values. Anti-Semitism, violent anti-Semitism, is making a resurgence now in the world that is akin to what it was in the 1930s. 85% of Jews in Europe stayed home on the Jewish holidays because they were scared. So there are tremendous problems in the world, and I think that the fact that our communities have come so close together and supportive of each other, the fact that there are people such as Father Dubois, the fact that we have a Pope who's supportive. I mean, there are a lot of, we still, I think, need to, or with our organizations locally and in the world, need to continue to really doing what we can to help counter whatever is responsible for the resurgence of anti-Semitism and whatever is responsible for the diminution of values in society. No one has figured out what to do yet. We figured out, as you said, things that we can help in our communities, the Catholic and Jewish communities. But it seems to me we need to really work hard to figure out what we can do on a larger, in a larger network in our communities and expanding from our communities. And we need a lot of help for that, for the world.
It seems to me like the real tension lines now are not between different religions, not between Catholicism and Judaism, or between Catholicism and Protestantism, etc., but really between faith-based communities and the non-faith-based rest of society, where there doesn't seem to be an influx of positive values. We seem to be in a more and more less value-driven society. And I think that's probably what we all have as a common, I don't want to say enemy, but that's going to be where our struggle will be, is bringing the relevance of religious values into the larger picture.
Could that be something behind Nostra Aetate, the intent to have Jews be as good as they can be and Christians be as good as they can be as well? Because we need that to make the world a better place.
But it also goes back to what Rabbi Herschel was saying about how God matters to us. And we live in a society which is becoming more and more secular. So those religious values are being lost or pushed aside by materialism or consumerism or an excessive individualism. And it's important, I think, that we reflect the centrality of God in our own lives and our own experiences, and share that with our children and live that in society. If we turn inward and just only are concerned about what type of Jew or what type of Christian I am, then we're never going to influence society for good. We have to live our faith in the world. Absolutely.
Truer words have never been said, and I think we're all on that same page. We have a few minutes if anyone has any questions or further comments.
Ask them.
Yeah, I'm off the hook now.
No, you're not.
I tried.
However, any questions asked that.
Okay. I have a specific suggestion in a way to give ways to work together with different group mates to better Youngstown. There's a group called Action, and many Christian churches and many Catholic parishes are members of Action, and their whole motivation is to better the life of the inner city in ways of education, private safety, health, and so on. I know many of them, I've been involved for years, but we've never had a Jewish congregation join us in Action, and it would be wonderful if one of your congregations would do so.
Sarah, there's one back there.
Father Mulqueen over there in the back.
Relative to the covenant debate, I believe we need to remember Jeremiah 31. And that's somewhat open-ended, but it's prophetic. And I think Jew and Christian both embrace this, but we won't be able to nail it down, make it the way we'd like to. But it has to be remembered.
Thank you.
Gentleman over here.
Sarah's moving a little slow. She'll get to you.
Yeah.
She's moving for two.
I was going to say, she's not just
She's
one.
fulfilling her Jewish Christian mandate
it's
to
true.
be fruitful and multiply.
Yes.
I wrote things like this. The other day, a friend of mine loaned me his book on restaurants in Youngstown. And last night, paging through it, meant to be with a group like this, and here's the bishop and the rabbis. But growing up in Youngstown, I can remember I went to parochial school, we met the school kids. And we met the Italians, but we didn't meet very many Jewish people in our schools. But back in the 40s and 50s, and I'll give you one anecdotal note about my growing up and relating to Jewish people. In the 30s, the Irish were on the east side of Youngstown, but had moved, like my father, to the south side. That was the migration. We didn't go big miles, but we went across town. But there was a store, and it was, if you come up from Sacred Heart Church into going north, Jake Bordas, Jewish fellow, ran the grocery store. My father, I think in the Depression, had a job sweeping streets in Youngstown. And everybody was worried about food on their table. And Jake took a liking to my dad, a young man at that time. And he said, Tommy, that was my father, he said, Tommy, as long as I have a store, you'll never have to worry about feeding your family. And after the war came, and then A&P was the big stores that came. And I remember a discussion between my mother and father. My mother was going to the new stores, you know. And my dad said to her that every week you will have an order from Jake for $25 or $50, I forget what the amount was, because he said that man carried us at difficult times, and now he has competition from these stores. We're going to continue being a customer of his stores. And I remember going down to the East Federal. You remember that? The East Federal was like the United Nations. You had Italian stores, you had Polish stores, you had Jewish stores, and I always remember, I think it was Rosenbluth. It was down close to the New York Central Station. And I don't know how my father built a relationship with the Jewish people who ran that store. But when I was a kid walking into that store, everybody, oh, Tommy, you know, you could feel the good relations. I'm sure that back in those times, there must have been some desecration of Jewish temples or that. I'm not aware of those things. I am only aware that we went to Jewish doctors, we went to Jewish stores to buy things. And I never felt any animosity to the Jewish people because they were our neighbors. So it's nice being here with you and listening to these stories.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more, if there's one more.
Thank you very much. I'm Margaret and I'm from Uganda. Just sitting here and listening to this discussion is really a blessing for me. But between the ones that the Rabbi and Bishop Murray and all the other people that I've mentioned, I want to say that probably it's out of ignorance that some of these atrocities or some of the things that are happening in the world. And so my suggestion would be that if we could teach our children, I mean, I never learned Jewish theology myself. And but just listening and, trying to get interest and studying or hearing, going to, such events opens your mind. Now, most of the folks here, sorry to say, are a bit advanced in age, not in a bad way. But how about the kids, the children? How about the young ones who don't know anything, or how do we interest them in this, and so that we understand that, we are all for God, and the One Root Foundation is really one, and so we need to be brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Final remarks before we're done?
You want to go first?
Don't worry, there's 3 microphones. I got
I guess I'm elected. I think it's wonderful to be able to get together. And this is, I think, the best part of it is that this is really representative of our community. It's not just a one-time getting together. We have a lot of deep relationships in our community. And our community members, as we heard, are friends. Their children are friends, to talk about the next generation. But we have a lot of work to do, which is highlighted by the comments made and the discussion. And at least we have a positive fabric of relationship in the community to be able to continue to work with everyone and to meet new challenges. We have a lot of new challenges through the internet. Those genocidal groups are reaching out to our young people and captivating them. We have to see what we can do to influence them so that they'll have positive values and the dedication to the right things and have the right course in life. But thank God that what we see as a discussion today is part of what's going on in our community, and God willing, we'll be able to continue to address these other issues and issues we haven't discussed in a realistic way and in an effective way. And so I'm very honored to be part of this discussion and forum.
I think that this evening was very, very worthwhile, and I think it should only be a beginning. We need to meet more frequently. We need to continue this conversation. We need to find ways that we can work on those big projects together, which is why I think it's important that we continue to speak with each other and understand each other. And I think it's important that we pray together. And any member of the Jewish community is welcome in any Catholic church in the Diocese of Youngstown. And I would hope that Catholics will be welcome at Jewish synagogues so that we can together pray to the same God and ask for his blessings. But I think that we have a history of working together which we need to expand and put even more energy in for the good of our community.
And I'm hoping that this kind of event, as wonderful as it was tonight, would be a more regular event within the community. To have a public dialogue that perhaps will branch out into private dialogue groups within the community. I think that would be a very good positive step.
Well, it's like listening to Isaiah. I think we've all heard their call. The call is to work together. It is to work toward justice and peace and for the betterment of this community. And I think this, as we've heard, this is a wonderful first step. So thank you all for coming. It was a wonderful evening. There's coffee, there's snacks. We'll all have a time to enjoy the fellowship together, as I mentioned. And again, thank you, Bishop Murray, for coming this evening and for answering questions and for engaging in dialogue. And of course, for your wonderful, insightful remarks. We are truly, truly appreciative of your time. And we didn't hear much about your trip to Rome, so we'll have to save that for the next time.
All right.
We're looking forward to it. Thank you all.